Thief of Time, Part 9. Tick. No one noticed Susan in the library of the Guild of Historians leafing her way through a pile of books. Occasionally, she'd make a note. She didn't know if her other gift was from death, but she'd always told the children that they had a lazy eye and a business eye. There were two ways of looking at the world. The lazy eye just saw the surface. The business eye saw through into the reality beneath. She turned a page. Seen through her business eye, history was very strange indeed. The scars stood out. History of the country of Ephebi was puzzling, for example. Either its famous philosophers lived for a very long time, or inherited their names, or extra bits had been stitched into history there. The history of Omnia was a mess. 2 centuries had been folded into one by the look of it, and it was only because of the mindset of the Omnians, whose religion mixed the past and the future with the present in any case, that it could possibly have passed by unnoticed. And what about Qa'Rajh Valley? Everyone knew that there had been a famous battle there between dwarves and trolls and mercenaries on both sides. But how many battles had there actually been? Historians talked about the valley being in just the right place in disputed territory to become more or less the preferred local pitch for all confrontations. But you could just as easily believe, at least you could if you had a grandfather called Death, that a patch that just happened to fit had been welded into history several times, so that different generations went round through the whole stupid disaster again and again, remember Qa'Rajh Valley as they did so. Every society needs a cry like that, but only in a very few do they come out with a complete, unvarnished version which is, remember the atrocity committed against us last time that will excuse the atrocity that we're about to commit today, and so on. Hurrah! There were anomalies everywhere, and no one had noticed. You had to hand it to human beings. They had one of the strangest powers in the universe. Even her grandfather had remarked upon it. No other species anywhere in the world had invented boredom. Perhaps it was boredom, not intelligence, that had propelled them up the evolutionary ladder. Trolls and dwarves had it too, that strange ability to look at the universe and think, oh, the same as yesterday, how dull. I wonder what happens if I bang this rock on that head over there. And along with this had come the contrary power to make things normal. The world changed mightily, and within a few days humans considered it was normal. They had the most amazing ability to shut out and forget what did not fit. They told themselves little stories to explain away the inexplicable to make things normal. Historians were especially good at it. If it suddenly looked as though hardly anything had happened in the 14th century, they'd weigh in with their 20 different theories. Not one of them would be that maybe most of the time had been cut out and pasted into the 19th century, where the crash had not left enough coherent time for everything that needed to happen, because it only takes a week to invent the horse collar. The history monks had done their job well, but their biggest ally was the human ability to think narratively. And humans had risen to the occasion. They'd say things like, Thursday already? What happened to the week? And time seems to go a lot faster these days. And it seems like only yesterday. But some things remained. The monks had carefully wiped out the time when the glass clock had struck. It had been surgically removed from history. Almost. Susan picked up the grim fairy tales again. Her parents hadn't bought her books like this when she was a child. They tried to bring her up normally. They knew that it was not an entirely good idea for humans to be too close to death. They taught her that facts were more important than fancy. And then she'd grown up and found out that the real fantasies weren't the Pale Rider or the Tooth Fairy or the Boogeyman. They were all solid facts. The big fantasy was that the world was a place where the toast did not care if it came butter side down or not, where logic was sensible, and that things could be made not to have happened at all. Something like the glass clock had been too big to hide. It had leaked out by the dark hidden labyrinth of the human mind and had become something of a folk tale. People had tried to coat it with sugar and magic swords, but its true nature still lurked like a rake in an overgrown lawn, ready to rise up at the incautious foot. Now someone was treading on it again, and the key point, was the chin it was rising to meet belonged to someone like me. She sat and stared at nothing for a while. Around her, historians climbed library ladders, fumbled books into their lecterns, and generally rebuilt the image of the past to suit the eyesight of today. One of them was, in fact, looking for his glasses. Time had a son, she thought, someone who walks in the world. There was a man who devoted himself to the study of time so wholeheartedly that for him time became real. He learned the ways of time, and time noticed him, Death has said. There was something there, almost like love. And time had a son. How? Susan had the kind of mind that would sour a narrative with a question like that. Time and immortal men, how could they ever... Well, how could they? And then she thought, my grandfather is Death. He adopted my mother. My father was his apprentice for a while. That's all that happened there. They were both human, and I turned up in the normal way. There's no way I should be able to walk through walls and live outside time and be a little bit immortal. But I am, and so this is not an area where logic and, let's face it, basic biology have any part to play. In any case, time is constantly creating the future, and the future contains things that didn't exist in the past. A small baby should be easy for someone that rebuilds the universe once every instant. Susan sighed. And you had to remember that time probably wasn't time in the same way that death wasn't exactly the same as death, and war wasn't exactly the same as war. She'd met War, a big fat man with an inappropriate sense of humor and a habit of repeating himself, and he certainly didn't personally attend to every minor fracas. She disliked Pestilence, who gave her funny looks, and Famine, well, he was just wasted and weird. None of them ran their, let's say, discipline. They personified it. Given that she'd met the Tooth Fairy, Soul Cake Duck, and Old Man Trouble, it amazed Susan that she had grown up to be mostly human, almost normal. As she stared at her notes, her hair unwound itself from its tight bun and took up its ground state position, which was that of someone who had just touched something highly electrical. It spread out around her like a cloud with one black streak of nearly normal hair. Grandfather might be an ultimate destroyer of worlds and the final truth of the universe, but that wasn't to say he didn't take an interest in the little people. And perhaps time did too. She smiled. Time waited for no man, they said. Perhaps she waited for one, once. Susan was aware that someone was looking at her, turned and saw the death of rats peering through the lens of the glasses that a mildly distracted man was searching for on the other side of the room. Up on a long, disregarded bust of a former historian, the raven preened himself. "Well," she said. "Squeak!" "Oh, he is he?" The doors of the library were nuzzled open and a white horse walked in. There's a terrible habit among horsey people to call a white horse grey, but even one of that bow-legged fraternity would have to admit that this one, at least, was in fact white. Not as white as snow, which is a dead white, but at least white as milk, which is relatively alive. His bridle and reins were black, and so was the saddle, but all of them were, in a sense, just for show. If the horse of death was inclined to let you ride him, then you'd stay on, saddle or no. And there was no upper limit to the amount of people he could carry. After all, plagues sometimes happened suddenly. The historians paid him no attention. Horses did not walk into libraries, and thus they didn't exist in their eyes. Susan mounted. There were plenty of times when she wished she'd been born completely human and wholly normal. She'd give up all the immortality tomorrow. Apart from Binky. A moment later, 4 hoof prints glowed like plasma in the air above the museum and faded away. Tick! The crunch of the Yeti's feet over the snow and the eternal wind of the mountains were the only sounds. Then Lopsang said, "By cut off his head, you actually mean sever the head from the body," said Lutzi. "And," said Lopsang, still in the tones of one carefully exploring every aspect of the haunted cave, "he doesn't mind?" "Well, it's a nuisance," said the Yeti. "A bit of a party trick. but it's okay if it helps. The sweeper has always been good friend to us. We owe him favors. I've tried teaching them the way, said Lucy proudly. Yes, very useful. A washed pot never boils, said the Yeti. Curiosity vied with annoyance in Lopsang's head and won. What have I missed here? You don't die? I don't die? With my head cut off? For laughing? Ho ho, said the Yeti. Of course I die, but this is not such a sizable transaction. It took us years to work out what the Yetis were up to, said Lucy. Their loops played hop with the mandala until the abbot worked out how to allow for them. They've been extinct a whole 3 times. 3 times, eh? Said Lopsang. That's a lot of times to go extinct. I mean, most species only manage it once, don't they? The Yeti was now entering a taller forest of ancient pines. This would be a good place, said Lucy. Put us down, sir. And we'll chop off your head, said Lopsang weakly. What am I saying? I'm not going to chop anyone's head off. You heard him say it doesn't bother him, said Lucy, as they were gently lowered to the ground. That's not the point, said Lopsang hotly. It is his head, said Lucy. But I mind. Oh, well, in that case, said Lucy, is it not written, if you want a thing done properly, you've got to do it yourself? Yes, it is, said the Yeti. Lucy took the sword out of Lopsang's hand, held it carefully, like someone unused to weapons. The Yeti obligingly knelt. You're up to date? Said Lucy. Yes. I cannot believe you're really doing this, said Lopsang. Interesting, said Lucy. Miss Cosmobilite says, seeing is believing, and strangely enough, the great Wen said, I have seen, and I believe. He brought the sword down and cut the Yeti's head. Tick. There was a sound rather like a cabbage being sliced in half, and then a head rolled into the basket, to the cheers and cries of, oh, I say, well done, from the crowd. The city of Qa'Rajh was a nice, peaceful, law-abiding place, and the city council kept it that way with a penal policy that combined the maximum deterrent with the minimum of reoffending. Gripper the butcher smarts. The late Gripper rubbed his neck. I demand a retrial, he said. This may not be a good time, said Death. It couldn't possibly have been murder because the soul of Gripper Smarts fumbled in its spectral pockets for a ghostly piece of paper, unfolded it, and continued in a voice of those to whom the written word is an uphill struggle, because the balance of my mind was disturbed. Really, said Death. He found it best to let the recently departed get things off of their chest. Yes, because I really, really wanted to kill him, right? And you can't tell me that's a normal frame of mind, right? It was a dwarf anyways, well, I don't think that should count as manslaughter. I understand that was the 7th dwarf you've killed, said Death. I'm very prone to being disturbed, said Gripper. Really, it's me who's the victim here. All I needed was a bit of misunderstanding, someone to see my point of view for 5 minutes. What was your point of view? All dwarves need a damn good kicking, in my opinion. Yeah, you're Death, right? Yes, indeed. I'm a big fan. I always wanted to meet you, you know. I've got a tattoo on you on my arm. Look here, done it myself. The benighted Gripper turned at the sound of hooves. A young woman in black, entirely unregarded by the crowd who were gathered around the food stalls and souvenir stall stands and the guillotine, was leading a large white stallion toward them. And you've even got a valet parking, said Gripper. Now that's what I call style. And with that, he faded away. What a curious person, said Death. Ah, Susan, thank you for coming. Our search narrows. Our search? Your search, in fact. It's just mine now, is it? I told you I have something else to attend to. More important than the end of the world? It is the end of the world. The rules say that a horseman shall ride out. That old legend, but you don't have to do that. It is one of my functions. I have to obey the rules. Why? They are breaking the rules. Bending them. They have found a loophole. I do not have that kind of imagination. It was like Jason and the battle for the stationery cupboard, Susan told herself. You soon learned that no one is to open the door in the stationery cupboard was a prohibition that a 7-year-old simply would not understand. You have to think and rephrase it in more immediate terms like, no one, Jason, no matter what, no, not even if they thought they heard someone shouting for help. No one, are you paying attention, Jason, is to open the door of the stationary cupboard or accidentally fall on the door handle so that it opens or threatens to seal Richenta's teddy bear unless she opens the door of the stationary cupboard, or be standing nearby when a mysterious wind comes out of nowhere and blows the door open all by itself. Honestly, it really did, or in any way open, cause to open, ask anyone else to open, jump up and down on the loose floorboard to open, in any other way seek to obtain entry to the stationary cupboard. Jason. A loophole, said Susan. Yes. Well, why can't you find one too? I am the Grim Reaper. I do not think people wish me to get creative. They would wish me to do the task assigned to me at this time by custom and practice. And that's just riding out? Yes. Where to? Everywhere, I think. In the meantime, you will need this. Death handed her a lifetimer. It was one of the special ones, slightly bigger than normal. She took it reluctantly. It looked like an hourglass, but all those little glittering shapes tumbling through the pinch was seconds. You know, I don't like doing the whole scythe thing, she said. It's not... Hey, this is really heavy. He is Lutze, a history monk, 800 years old. He has an apprentice. I have learned this, but I cannot feel him. I cannot sense him. He is the one. Binky will take you to the monk. You will find the child. And then what? I suspect he will need someone. When you have found him, let Binky go. I shall need him. Susan's lips moved as memory collided with a thought. To ride out, she said, are you really talking about apocalypse? Are you serious? No one believes in that sort of thing anymore. I do. Susan's jaw dropped. You're really going to do that, knowing everything that you know? Death patted Binky on the muzzle. Yes, he said. Susan gave her grandfather a sideways look. Hold on, there's a trick, isn't there? You're planning something and you're not even going to tell me, right? You're not really going to just wait for the world to end and celebrate it, are you? We will ride out. No! You will not tell the rivers not to flow. You will not tell the sun not to shine. You will not tell me what I should and should not do. But it is so... Susan's expression changed, and Death flinched. I thought you cared. Take this also. Without wanting to, Susan took a smaller lifetimer from her grandfather. She may talk to you. And who is this? The midwife, said Death. Now, find the sun. He faded. Susan looked down at the lifetimer in her hands. He's done it to you again, she screamed to herself. You don't have to do this. You could put this thing down, you can go back to the classroom and be a normal again, and you just know that you won't, and so does he. Squeak! The death of rats was sitting between Binky's ears, grasping a lock of the white mane, with a general impression of someone anxious to get going. Susan raised a hand to slap him off and then stopped herself. Instead, she pushed the heavy lifetimer into the rat's paws. Make yourself useful, she said, grasping the reins and mounting up. Why do I do this? Squeak! I have not got a nice nature. Tick. There was not surprisingly a great deal of blood. The head rolled into the snow, and the body slowly toppled forward. Now you killed... Lopsang began. Just a second, said Lutze. Any moment now. The headless body vanished. The kneeling Yeti turned his head to Lutze and blinked and said, That stung a bit. Sorry. Lutze turned to Lopsang. Now, hold on to that memory, he commanded. It'll try to vanish, but you've had training. You've got to go on remembering that you saw something which now did not happen. Understand? Remember that time is a lot less unbending than people think, if you get your head right. Just a little lesson. Seeing is believing. How did it do that? Good question. They can save their life up to a certain point and go back to it if they get killed, said Lutze. How it's done? Well, the abbot spent the best part of a decade working that one out. Not that anyone else can understand it. There's a lot of quantum stuff involved. He took a pull out of his permanent foul cigarette. Gotta be good working out, if no one else can understand it. The Yeti of the Ramtops where the disc world's magical field is so intense that it is part of the very landscape, are one of the few creatures to utilize control of personal time for genetic advantage. The result is kind of a physical premonition. You find out what is going to happen next by allowing it to happen. Faced with danger or any kind of task that involves the risk of death, a Yeti will save its life up to that point and then proceed with all due caution, yet in the comfortable knowledge that should everything go pancake-shaped, it will wake up at the point where it saved itself with, and this is the important part, knowledge of the events which have just happened but which will not happen now because it's not going to be such a damn fool next time. This is not quite the paradox it appears, because after it has taken place, it hasn't happened. All that actually remains is a memory in the Yeti's head, which merely turns out to be a remarkably accurate premonition. The little eddies in time caused by all this are just lost in the noise of all the kinks, dips, and knots put in time by every other living creature. "How is there but these days?" said the Yeti, getting to its feet again and picking up the pilgrims. Teething. "Reincarnation's always the problem," said the Yeti, falling into his long ground-eating lobe. "Teeth are the worst," he says, "always coming or going." "How fast are we going?" said Lopsang. The Yeti's stride was more like a continuous series of leaps from one foot to the other. There was so much spring in the long legs that each landing was a mere faint rocking sensation. It was almost restful. "I reckon we're doing 30 miles an hour or so, clock time," said Lutze. "Get some rest. We'll be above Copperhead in the morning. It's all downhill from there." "Coming back from the dead," Lopsang murmured. "It's more like not actually ever going in the first place," said Lutze. "I've studied the technique a bit, but, well, unless it's built in, you have to learn how to do it, and would you want to bet on getting it right the first time? A tricky one, that. You have to be desperate. I hope I am never that desperate." Tick. Susan recognized the country of Lancre from the air, a little bowl of woods and fields perched like a nest on the edge of the Ramtop Mountains. And she found the cottage, too, which was not the corkscrew-chimneyed, compost-heap kind of witch house popularized by the grim fairy tales and other books, but a spanking new one with gleaming thatch and a manicured front lawn. There were more ornaments, gnomes, toadstools, pink bunnies, big-eyed deer around a tiny pond than any sensible gardener should have allowed for. Susan spotted one brightly painted gnome fish. Nope, that wasn't a rod he was holding, was it? Surely a nice old lady wouldn't put something like that in her garden, would she? Would she? Susan was bright enough to go around the back because witches were allergic to front doors. It was opened by a small, fat, rosy-cheeked woman whose little currant eyes said, "Yep, that's my gnome, all right, and be thankful he's only whittling in the pond." "Mrs. Ogg, the midwife?" There was a pause before Mrs. Ogg said, "The very same." "You don't know me, but," said Susan, and realized that Mrs. Ogg was looking past her at Binky, who was standing by the gate. The woman was a witch, after all. "Maybe I do know you," said Mrs. Ogg. "Of course, if you just stole that horse, you just don't know how much trouble you're in. I borrowed it. The owner is my grandfather." Another pause, and it was disconcerting how those little friendly eyes could bore into yours like an auger. "You'd better come in," said Mrs. Ogg. The inside of the cottage was as clean and new as the outside. Things gleamed, and there were a lot of them to gleam. The place was a shrine to bad but enthusiastically painted china ornaments which occupied every single flat surface. What space was left was full of framed pictures. Two harassed-looking women were polishing and dusting. "I got company," said Miss Ogg sternly, and the woman left with such alacrity that the word fled might have been more appropriate. "My daughters-in-law," said Mrs. Ogg, sitting down in a plump armchair which over the years had shaped itself to fit her. "They like to help a poor old lady who's all alone in the world." Susan took in the pictures. They were all of family members. If they were all of family members, Mrs. Ogg was head of an army. Mrs. Ogg, unashamedly caught out in a flagrant lie, went on, "Sit down, girl, and say what's on your mind. There's tea brewing." "I need to know something." "Most people do," said Mrs. Ogg, "and they can go on wanting." "I want to know about a birth," said Susan, persevering. "Oh, yes. Well, I've done hundreds of confinements, thousands, probably. I imagine this one was difficult." "A lot of them are," said Mrs. Ogg. "You'd remember this one. I don't know how it started, but I imagine that a stranger came knocking." "Oh?" Mrs. Ogg's face became a wall. The black eyes stared out at Susan as if she was an invading army. "You're not helping me, Mrs. Ogg." "That's right, I ain't," said Mrs. Ogg. "I think I know about you, miss, but I don't care who you are, you see. You can go and get the other one if you like. Don't think I ain't seen him neither. I've been at plenty of deathbeds too, but deathbeds is public, mostly, and birthbeds ain't. Not if the lady don't want them to be. So you get the other one, and I'll get spit in his eye." "This is very important, Mrs. Ogg." "You're right there," said Mrs. Ogg firmly. "I can't say how long ago it was. It may have been last week even. Time, that's the key." And there it was. Mrs. Ogg was not a poker player, at least not against someone like Susan. There was the tiniest flicker of the eyes. Mrs. Ogg's chair was ran back in her effort to rise, but Susan got to the mantelpiece first and snatched what was there, hidden in plain view among the ornament. "You give that here!" shouted Mrs. Ogg as Susan held it out of her reach. You could feel the power in the thing. It seemed to pulse in her hand. "Have you any idea what this is, Mrs. Ogg?" she said, opening her hand to reveal the little glass bulbs. "Yes, it's an egg timer that don't work," Mrs. Ogg said, sat down hard in her overstuffed chair so that her little legs rose off the floor for but a moment. "It looks to me like a day, Mrs. Ogg, a day's worth of time." Miss Ogg glanced at Susan and then at the little hourglass in her hand. "I reckon there was something odd about it," she said. "The sand don't go through it when you tip it up, see? That's because you don't need it to yet, Mrs. Ogg." Nanny Ogg appeared to relax. Once again Susan reminded herself that she was dealing with a witch. They tended to keep up. "I kept it 'cause it was a gift," said the old lady. "And it looks so pretty too. What do them letters around the edge say?" Susan read the words etched on the metal base of the life timer. "Tempus Redux. Time return," she said. "That'd be it," said Miss Ogg. "The man did say I'd be repaid for my time." "The man?" said Susan gently. Nanny Ogg glanced up, her eyes ablaze. "Don't you try to take advantage of me just because I'm momentarily a bit flustered," she snapped. "There's no way around Nanny Ogg." Susan looked at the woman, and this time not with the lazy eye, and there was indeed no way around Mrs. Ogg. But there was another way with Miss Ogg. It went straight through her heart. "A child needs to know his parents," Mrs. Ogg said. She said, "now more than ever. He needs to know who he really is. It's going to be hard for him, and I want to help him." "Why?" "Because I wish someone had helped me," said Susan. "Yes, but there are rules to midwifery," said Nanny Ogg. "You don't say what was said or what you saw, not if the lady don't want you to." The witch wriggled awkwardly in her chair, her face going red. "She wants to tell me," Susan knew. "She is desperate to. But I've got to play it right so she can square it with herself. I'm not asking for names, Mrs. Ogg, because I expect you don't know them," she went on. "That's true. But the child... Look, miss, I'm not really supposed to tell a living soul about if it helps. I'm not entirely certain that I am one," said Susan. She watched Mrs. Ogg for a while. "But I understand. There have to be rules, don't there? Thank you for your time." Susan stood up and put the preserved day back on the mantelpiece. She then walked out of the cottage, shutting the door behind her. Binky was still waiting by the gate. She mounted up, and it wasn't until then that she heard the door open behind her. "That's what he said," said Mrs. Ogg, "when he gave me the egg timer. 'Thank you for your time, Mrs. Ogg,' he said. 'You'd better come back in, my girl.'" Tick.